accident. Such determinations and records are available from the U.S. Weather Service. In order to give further meaning to this concept of preventability, I want to talk about common preventable accidents. First of all, let's talk about common accidents at intersections. Accidents at intersections are covered in page B2 of the manual that I've previously discussed. And we have a brief film clip here which shows the results that very bad things can happen involving trucks at accidents in a great hurry.
And then, out of nowhere,
accidents at intersections should be deemed preventable if the driver failed to control his speed so as to be able to stop within sight distance. Or perhaps the driver simply failed to check cross traffic and wait for it to clear. Intersection accidents should be deemed preventable if the driver pulled out from a side street in the face of oncoming traffic. Perhaps the driver collided with a person, vehicle, or object while making either right or left-hand turns. Accidents may also be deemed to be preventable if, of course, there was a violation of a stop or a yield sign, or if the driver failed to signal. Perhaps the driver failed to properly position the vehicle for a turn, or he failed to check the mirrors or pedestrian lanes for any obstruction or any hazard that's presented in those situations at the sides of the vehicle. Finally, an accident at an intersection should be deemed preventable if the driver simply failed to yield the right-of-way when the intentions of the other driver were unclear, where the issue was not controlled by a stop sign. The next topic that I want to cover are start-up or back-up accidents. Perhaps the driver may have failed to walk around the vehicle and to check underneath to assure safe clearance for startup. Or perhaps the driver started up or backed up rapidly and surprised other parties who were in the vicinity. Accidents starting up or backing up should be deemed preventable if the driver failed to check his mirrors for proper adjustment and again overlooked obstacles at the front or either side. Perhaps the driver backed up into a situation where backing could have been avoided altogether by better planning. Or perhaps the driver backed up from a blind side when he could have made a side approach that would be safer. Perhaps the driver failed to obtain a spotter when help was available. If help is available in the form of a spotter, it should be employed. Or perhaps they failed to make certain that hand signals were going to be clearly understood by both parties. In that kind of situation, preventability should be found. It has been suggested that about 1/4 of all trucking accidents involve backing. That's not entirely unexpected, since backing is a complex maneuver, and most such accidents involve a collision with a stationary object. And by definition, almost all such accidents are therefore preventable. Next, I want to talk about passing as an object and a situation involving preventable accidents. This is important because, in general, the chance of error is high and the costs of error are high because these incidents occur at high speed, and therefore the maneuver needs to be done cautiously. Perhaps the driver passed when the view of the road ahead was obstructed by a hill, a curve, vegetation, or some other condition. The driver may have attempted to pass in the face of closely approaching traffic. Or perhaps the driver failed to warn the operator of the vehicle being passed. Preventability also should be found if the driver failed to signal a lane change or to change lanes in the face of oncoming traffic. Perhaps the driver caused the truck to pull out in front of other traffic that was overtaking from the rear, or the driver may have cut in short after passing. In all of those instances, preventability should be the deciding factor and should be assessed. Next, I want to talk about rollover accidents. These are a quite common, of course, and it needs to be asked, was the driver aware that advisory speeds and curves generally apply to cars rather than to cargo-laden trucks, because the driver may have gone into the curve simply too fast. Such accidents also occur frequently because the cargo is not properly secured. In that connection, the question needs to be asked, did the driver have an opportunity to inspect the cargo securement? First of all, was the cargo secured by the carrier or by the shipper? And if it was loaded by the shipper, did the driver have the opportunity to inspect cargo securement before proceeding with the load? Or did the driver simply have to take the load as tendered in a sealed trailer? Perhaps in rollover accidents, the driver's path took the vehicle, the trailer, onto a lower shoulder or to a drop-off. In that case, preventability should be assessed. And finally, the driver should be aware and should be trained to slow down substantially for any unfamiliar curves. The next topic that I want to discuss is brake performance and brake failure accidents, which are covered at page C3 of the manual. Determinations in this area are somewhat unique because they involve questions that address the performance of both the company and the driver. It needs to be asked, first of all, are preventive maintenance procedures in place to detect and to repair worn or defective brake system components? Does the company have established standards for detecting and indicating out-of-service conditions for brake system components that are subject to progressive deterioration? Air leaks, brake shoe wear, drum wear, or bearing seal leakage. It must be acknowledged that the Commercial Motor Vehicle Safety Alliance has published out-of-service criteria in all of these areas and in general for brake system components. These standards have been adopted by FMCSA and state safety agencies for roadside inspections and out-of-service criteria. It is obvious that the company's standards for brake system maintenance and out-of-service changes should be substantially better than those conditions that are going to result in an out-of-service order at a roadside inspection. It also needs to be asked, are the drivers adequately trained to detect deteriorated conditions during pre-trip inspections? And also, are maintenance supervisors and mechanics adequately trained to detect those problems? In connection with the operation of the truck immediately prior to a brake system failure, it needs to be questioned whether all low air warning devices on the vehicle were functioning properly. Did the driver perform an adequate pre-trip inspection before departing? And did the driver check his brake function before approaching an identified and known downgrade? Next, let's consider some non-preventable accidents. One example is an accident that occurs when the truck is struck from the rear by another vehicle. In general, those accidents may be deemed non-preventable if, first of all, the truck was legally and properly parked, or if the truck was proceeding and moving. Was the driver proceeding in his own lane at a safe and lawful speed? Perhaps the driver was stopped in traffic due to existing conditions, or was stopped in compliance with a traffic sign or signal. In those situations, of course, non-preventability should be the answer. Perhaps the driver was in the proper lane, waiting to make a turn. Again, non-preventability should be the answer in that situation. Perhaps the truck was parked or stopped in an emergency. Non-preventability should be found if, in fact, the hazard warning flashers were activated, and if the warning triangles were deployed. The next category of non-preventable accident that I want to talk about is the side swipe or head-on collision with another vehicle that is in the wrong lane. Such accidents should be considered as non-preventable if the truck was entirely in its proper lane of travel and Next, if the driver did not have time for evasive action, or if evasive action would have involved additional danger or an accident of a different kind. Let us move on now to talk about some general principles that are applicable in determining the subject of preventability. First of all, let's talk about weather. In that regard, weather as such does not cause accidents. Weather simply represents one of the hazards of driving. Driving a truck on a highway is an outdoor activity. There is always going to be weather of some kind. But the question needs to be asked, did the driver choose to proceed when the weather conditions were extreme? It needs to be acknowledged that possibly the driver may have been instructed to proceed despite having reported the weather conditions to dispatch. And if so, were the weather conditions accurately reported? In extreme situations, snow and ice, did the driver use chains? And was the vehicle equipped with an adequate set of proper chains? On the subject of weather, it's necessary to keep in mind Section 392.14 of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. And again, let me quote precisely. Extreme caution in the operation of a commercial motor vehicle shall be exercised when hazardous conditions, such as those caused by snow, ice, sleet, fog, mist, rain, dust, or smoke, adversely affect visibility or traction. Speed shall be reduced when such conditions exist. If conditions become sufficiently dangerous, the operation of the commercial motor vehicle shall be discontinued and shall not be resumed until the commercial motor vehicle can be safely operated. Another area of special concern and special caution are driveways, alleys, and plant entrances. Plants are often congested, and they present special hazards and the need for special attention and caution. In these situations, it must be asked, was the driver familiar with the location? Did the driver collide with a fixed object? Again, the object cannot get out of the way. Did the driver take special precautions that might have been warranted, such as reducing his speed, sounding a warning, or yielding to other vehicles or equipment that might have been present on the plant site? One other general principle that needs to be mentioned is that consideration needs to be given to accidents involving more than one company driver. We may have a situation where there were two or more company vehicles involved in the same accident with different drivers. In that event, a separate preventability determination should be made for each vehicle. On the other hand, if two drivers were in the same truck, the preventability determination should be made for the driver actually in operation of the vehicle. In conclusion, let me say that, first of all, that accidents are costly to companies in terms of equipment repair, damage to cargo, loss of customer goodwill, and insurance premiums. Therefore, every possible step should be taken to reduce the incidence of accidents, including preventable accidents. Compliance with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations has in general been shown to avoid both out-of-service orders and to reduce the incidence of accidents. On the other hand, frequent out-of-service orders increase the likelihood of a compliance review by federal or state safety auditors and the possibility of an unsatisfactory safety rating. A systematic program of accident preventability determination is a highly useful safety management tool. It establishes a standard for the conduct that the company expects of its professional drivers. If it is to succeed, of course, the accident preventability program must be one that is perceived as systematic, uniform, and fair. Finally, preventability is a more stringent concept than legal liability or any violation of law. It involves both